Hi, this is Corey Johnston, and today's chapter lesson is going to begin in the 28th verse of John's 18th chapter. Herein we read of the Messiah before Pontius Pilate in judgment, and the way that the only way that the Jews could actually kill him was at the behest of their Roman masters. So as we read in the 18th chapter before this comes, we read of his arrest, betrayal, and trial, and then we read of Peter's denials, his first denial. Then we hear of the actual trial itself, and then we read after that Peter would deny his master when it mattered most, as predicted earlier. Peter was a man, an outspoken and courageous but careless man who often uttered what was on his mind without speaking before it, and he was so confident that he would resist the temptation to not forsake his master when it needed most. He even said he would travel with him unto death, and then to his own disappointment and I couldn't say surprise, but he learns that it comes true. But now we find him here in the judgment palace of Pontius Pilate, who was the Roman governor. They would have had the power of the sword in whatever province they ruled. So the way they did it is they subscribed to the premise of ancient polytheism, that the gods were to be respected in their own homes. And they did not envision Yahweh as the God of the universe, but only of Israel. So as such, they would have let his people conduct their religious services only in as much as it did not interfere with the operation of the Roman state. And the fact that this man had been the Messiah, who is now in question, had been such a figure of controversy, and the city was clearly violent from his presence. He was stirring up trouble. The religious leaders could reasonably claim to Pontius Pilate, although he wasn't doing it. It was just the reaction surrounding him. But we read of passing mention in this in the other Gospels, but none of them are lengthy enough to be called an actual story. And it is in John's Gospel that we hear of the actual dialogue which existed between the accused and the judger. And as we'll read, the judge was not convinced that this man did merit death, and crucifixion was a punishment reserved only for traitors of the state. This was not a normal capital punishment, execution. But the Jews, the only way they could kill them was according to that. And what's interesting is in their own trial, when they were the accusers and the judge, they accused and judged him of blasphemy. But the Romans could really care less about the honoring of a name, which means nothing to them. So they had to present their petition to Pilate, as we will soon read, that he claimed to be king, and as such, if taken literally and at face value, would have been pretext for treason, because Rome did not tolerate any kings they did not authorize. But we're going to get to the dialogue itself. Then they led Yahshua from Caiaphas to the palace, and it was early, and they themselves did not go into the palace, lest they should be defiled, but that they might eat the Passover. So this gives us a window into the time of the year that it was. It was Passover, which would have occurred sometime in April, the holiday which commemorates the Jewish Exodus, and their values and priorities were such that they would not permit themselves to enter into the forbidden presence of the palace of a Gentile. Yet they neglected so blinding was their legalism, and so entrapped were they by it, that they neglected to observe the weightier matters of religion, justice, among other things, the Messiah says elsewhere in his gospel. So at this moment in time, we witness the truth of that statement, because they were not concerned with justice at this point. They were more concerned with preserving their ceremonial purity, that they might go through the motions of publicly praising the one who is far removed from their hearts. Pilate, therefore, came out to them and said, "What accusation do you bring against this man?" So since he's in his presence, the natural question prompted is, why did you bring him here? What has he done? why am I being bothered with this right now? And their answer is, they answered and said to him, if he were not an evildoer, we would not have delivered him up to you. So the Jews were trying to argue that they would not waste his time if he were not, in fact, meriting of what they were bringing him for judgment, that they would not do so. And so they were ostensibly mindful of the balance of courting and cultivating the Roman favor. And that is something that the supposedly patriotic Jews remember. The entire reason that they sought to kill him was that their nation could survive. They were so worried about the controversy that this man might conceivably wreck, that the Jewish nation might be destroyed in their calculation. So they weren't the least bit patriotic. So they were surrendering him to the hated Gentile ruler to be executed according to their customs, and their own blasphemous charge conveniently neglected to that end. Then Pilate said to them, you take him and judge him according to your law. The Jews said to him, is it not right for us to put anyone to death? So the Jews, in other words, said that they were not there, they were not wasting his time. They wanted him to execute danger to them both. And in order that the word of Yahweh might be filled, which he spoke about, signifying by what death he was to die. So all this was in a pattern which was preempted by prophecy. So his life is in a motion which is designed to bring him to this point where he will be our full, satisfactory, and sufficient final atonement, hence necessitating any other substitutionary atonements null and void from that time and forever forward. Then Pilate went back into the palace and called Joshua and said to him, you are the king of the Jews? So we can infer that what the Jews had settled in their hearts to tell him is that he called himself king, and such, strictly speaking, was severe violation, potentially treasonous. So that was his cause for concern. Did this man claim to be the king of the Jews? And who is he if the Romans did not declare him so to do such a thing? Joshua answered him, do you say this for yourself, or did others talk to you about me? So he wants to know what the source of his charge is. So where did he learn that he was called the king of the Jews? And of course it was from the Jews themselves, who had ratted him out to the man they professed to hate as an evil Gentile. Pilate answered, am I Jewish? Your own nation and the chief priest have delivered you to me. What did you do? So he establishes the fact that he is not Jewish. He does not have any way of knowing if one of the Jews had declared himself their king. But he's also telling him that his own nation, as represented by the high priest, who would have had access to his court and his ear, had delivered him to him, and he wants to know, why did they do this? Why are you before me? What am I judging you for? And Joshua answered, my kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, my servants would fight so that I should not be delivered to the Jews. But now my kingdom is not of here. So his kingdom has no definable or locatable geographical boundaries. His king is of another world. His king is a spiritual kingdom and not one of carnal or the flesh of the world. And if he were of the world, if he was in fact a Jewish expected deliverer and triumpher over one who was destined to triumph over their oppressors, that is something he would in all likelihood have men fighting for him. But at this moment in time, he was deserted by all of the 12. We read Peter, even when he denied him before that, he had deserted him along with 11 others in Gethsemane. John alone was privileged to see the crucifixion, and he alone did not desert him. He alone was with him all the way till the end. And he had an authority from that witness which gives the details of this account that the other synoptics lack. Then Pilate said to him, "You are a king then?" Yeshua answered, "You say it, because I am a king. For this I was born, and for this I have come into the world, that I should bear witness to the truth. Everyone who is of the truth hears my voice." So his kingdom spreads not by force, but by persuasion and conviction. He speaks the truth, and it does pierce the heart of the sinner who wants to be saved and maybe don't know how they can be saved, but he's going to show them the way. And the way he's going to do that is to realize that in their sinful selves they cannot save themselves, but his truth can, and that is a truth in itself and an exalted promise. And the entire essence of our faith is in some sense summarized in that principle. And so he is not a threat to the Roman people, in other words, because he was gentle and persuasive by the force which had kind of accumulated among him, which posed no military threat or anything else. These were a people committed to being peacemakers on the earth, and they, even though they provoked the violence of the Roman Empire, they ultimately did make it a more peaceful place. Pilate said to him, "What is truth?" And when he had said this, he went out again to the Jews and said to them, "I find no guilt in him." So after a statement of his curiosity, he has some curiosity about the truth, but not enough to distract him from his duties, which as he sees it is to administer justice. And in his judgment, he makes it known to the Jews who had brought him before them that he had no cause, there is no guilt to punish, there is no actual reason that he should be punished, because he poses no threat whatsoever to us. They are not concerned with their religious customs or anything of the like. They leave them to do it, free to do what they do, inasmuch it does not compromise the strength of the Roman state. And this man did not pose the threat that they thought he did. So the Jews kind of had exaggerated expectations, and by this point they were so blinded by their murderous passion that they weren't really calculating in any coherent order. But that's one of the destructive qualities of hatred, is that it does compromise our cognitive capacities by forcing us to dwell on an irrational emotion, which does not make us smarter or wiser people. "But you have a custom that I shall release someone to you at the Passover. Do you want then that I release to you the kings of the Jews?" So he's offering them, this is the custom which would have been observed by the Roman governors, who at this time of year would always be stationed in the Jerusalem, which was the capital of their province of Palestine. And the reason that they would have been there at this time of the year is because the potential for nationalistic furor and uproar was always only a spark away. So the potential for a zealous outbreaking from the zealots was always on the mind of the Romans at this point, because the fact is that the Jews, like anyone else, did not like to be a conquered people. So a lot of them, among them, resisted by violence, and not enough at any point in time, but they were so blinded by their own murderous passion. Remember, it's the nation of Israel and the high priest who had put him there, that they launched an ultimately futile rebellion against the Roman Empire in the year 66, and by 70 A.D., their beloved and precious and treasured temple would be burned to the ground on account of their insolence. So they really, and that was done by the Emperor Titus, who was the son of the current emperor, the first Vespasian prince, whose name's not important, but Titus is more important to the Jewish and Christian people in the fact that he was the one who destroyed their precious and beloved temple. And remember, the temple and the synagogue was the earliest places that the Christian fellowship gathered and congregated. It was not until the year 50 A.D. that the term assembly, where they assembled at private homes, would come into circulation, and not until at least the 300s, with Constantine's mass conversion of the entire Roman Empire, that it would become to be known as a church in institutionally protected buildings, designated locations for an accepted religion of the state to gather and do what they do. Then they all shouted again, saying, "Not this one, but Barabbas." And Barabbas was a robber. So, as a robber, it was a thief on the cross that the Savior would ultimately find himself next to, we read of in Luke's account. So, by robbers, people like the thief who was crucified in Barabbas would not have been ordinary thieves. Remember, crucifixion was not an ordinary mechanism of capital punishment. It was reserved for only traitors of the state. So we gather that Barnabas was more than a petty thief, yet, and he was an inciter and revolutionary in other accounts. And but so perverted was the Jewish patriotic priorities at this moment in time that they would gladly exchange one who had insulted Rome for one who had never, but they needed their power to kill him because that was something that they were obsessed about at this point. They could not stand his presence, and it's really remarkable to think about of how much Yahshua could have accomplished if he was given the length of an ordinary life. But of course, he is from eternity and dwells therein. So the 3 years of his life on earth was more than enough to do all that he needed to do in his divine ministry. And that is something we partake of and share of, and the burden is ours. So I hope you're here to do that, and I'm happy to help you with whatever way I can. That's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much. I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.